John McMullen will join us, of course, as he does every day at this time. He's ready to go. We'll bring him into the conversation as the Eagles and the Cowboys, but a lot of NFL news and notes we're going to dive into here on a Sports Bash Thursday. John, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, Mike.
All right, man. Well, let's dive into some of the storylines here. Let's start off with number one. Ryan Matthews did not practice today. I guess it gives a little bit more credence to the fact that maybe his groin is bothering him more than we thought. But forget all of that. The fact that he didn't practice today, does that mean he might be questionable then to go for Sunday?
Yeah, you would think so. I mean, with the Eagles and the way they have their practice sessions set up, Wednesday and Thursday are the most important days. So it's a big deal that he missed today. It's even a bigger deal that Jason Peters missed Wednesday and Thursday, and so did D'Amico Ryan. So those two probably aren't going to play. And, yeah, it indicates at best they'll probably be questionable and possibly a game-time decision. But as Chip always will say, you know, let's wait for Friday and Saturday and see what happens, because we could all step outside and get hit by a bus. So it's always day-to-day for all of us.
Sure is, and one thing today he mentioned about Peters was we'll wait till Saturday to find out, and I guess Lane Johnson going over to the left side is a little bit better of an indication that they might be a little bit more doubtful for Peters.
Yeah, it's pretty clear they're preparing to start Lane Johnson on the left side, Dennis Kelly at right tackle. Less moving parts, I guess, because the other way to do it would be to kick Matt Tobin from right guard to left tackle and then have Kelly play right guard. And with Greg Hardy on the horizon, that could be an issue because predominantly he lines up at right defensive end, and it's a pretty clear indication that they feel more comfortable with Lane Johnson than Matt Tobin trying to handle that. But at the same time, the Cowboys have moved them all around, so if Dennis Kelly's out there, they're going to find him, and at some point, probably in a key pass rushing situation, he's going to have to block Greg Hardy, and that's going to be difficult.
Sure is. I want to ask you about Hardy and what he brings in terms of the difference between the first time the Eagles played Dallas and now this time. He wasn't in that first game, nor was Dez Bryant. The Cowboys won that game, so adding Dez and adding Hardy sounds like this Cowboys team, even though Romo started that game, he didn't do much that night. They won that game with that block punt and really the ineptitude of the Eagles offense. So getting Hardy and Dez, and you didn't beat them the last time, does this tell you that the Eagles are in trouble?
You know, the Cowboys have a talented team, and we've talked about it since basically day one. They do have more talent than the Eagles, but when you take away the quarterback and you take away the leader, it's a big equalizer. And the fact that Tony Romo's there is a concern, even though, as you mentioned, he didn't play all that well. There's still a big difference as far as handling things at the line of scrimmage and just making sure everything goes smoothly from Tony Romo down to Brandon Weeden and now Matt Castle. So that's a tremendous equalizer, even though they've added pretty much two All-Pros to the lineup in Bryant and Hardy. In the case of Bryant, though, it was pretty clear last week he's not ready to play. And we talked to Brad Sham about that on Tuesday. It's, you know, he's great to have out there, and you have to pay attention to him because if all of a sudden you say to yourself, we'll slough off him because he's not 100%, I mean, he can catch the football and get down the field. So at least from that standpoint, it's a big improvement. As far as Hardy, he might be a horrible human being, but he's been the real deal as expected. He's one of the best defensive ends in football, and he's had 3 sacks in 3 games. He's been incredibly disruptive. And he's only going to help a defensive line that dominated the Eagles the first time around.
We're talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Of course, the Eagles and the Cowboys this week. And, you know, that's one area where they're a little bit better with Hardy there. And obviously they've gotten a lot more sea legs under them with guys like Lee, who had missed all last year. They got McLean back as well on that side of the ball. But how about when you flip over to the Eagles in terms of the offensive line? They really struggled against the Cowboys last time. DeMarco Murray had 2 yards on 13 carries in that game, John. The Eagles a better unit this time around.
Well, they're playing much better, and really was the Cowboys that exposed them early in the season. They did a lot of slanting at the line of scrimmage, and I got a chance to talk to Matt Tobin and Dennis Kelly today and talk to them about that and asked them if that was rare and the Cowboys kind of amped it up against the Eagles. They downplayed it a little bit because they play that Tampa 2 philosophy under Rod Marinelli, and it does require the defensive linemen to penetrate. But they were really selling out in that first game, just trying to destroy the gaps, and that's exactly what happened. And I don't think the Eagles were prepared for it, and that's why you saw all those negative plays in the running game, because they weren't really concerned with discipline and keeping their backs. They were just keeping their gaps. They were just more concerned about getting into the backfield and blowing up the play.
What have the Eagles? I don't want to cut you, but what have the Eagles done then since that game to combat that? Because I think you're right. They were just selling out and going after Murray because they don't believe that Bradford's going to run. But that's the situation that this team faces a lot of the time, though, right?
Yeah, it is, and it hurts. And we've talked about that ad nauseum. This offense can't work at its peak pace until we get a quarterback that is at least a threat to run the football. So while you acknowledge that, you also have to acknowledge that they don't have that right now, so they have to adjust, and they have adjusted a little bit in the past 4 weeks when they run the ball better. And one of the ways they've done that is simple things like the lining up, the formations between the offensive linemen. They've shrunk that. What they want normally, if you watch a college game, for instance, and they have larger hash marks, you see a longer length between the offensive linemen. The Eagles can't do that anymore because they realize teams are shooting those gaps like the Cowboys did, and it's become a less explosive offense, but a more fundamentally sound one as far as blocking techniques go, and it has to be that way until they get the quarterback that can really open up this offense.
Talk with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, the Eagles and the Cowboys. And, John, obviously Bradford is a big storyline leading into this game. There was a lot of conversation. Should they bench him? Should they move to Sanchez? What if Tuesday we're over at the Nugget and we and you were discussing a guy who threw up another clunker? Well, then what?
And then what? It's going to be tough for Chip Kelly. I mean, if you think about this, remember that game in week 2 of the season probably was the low point for each team. In the Eagles' case, because they played so poorly, and as you mentioned, especially in the running game, they had 7 yards total. Murray, as you said, had 2 yards on 13 carries. I mean, those numbers are hard to duplicate if you're trying. It was so poor. And on the other hand, the Cowboys won the game, but Jordan Hicks knocked Tony Romo out, and they haven't won since. And if the Eagles go down to Dallas after the bye and lose to a Matt Castle-led Cowboys team, it's going to be ugly on Monday. It really is. And even though it might not be fair, because the Cowboys are better than people think, and they've been very competitive since Castle has taken over. They're a better team. I realize it hasn't showed up. They've still lost, but they were very close against the Giants, probably outplayed the Giants if it wasn't for a kickoff return. And against Seattle, which still has one of the best defenses in football, they certainly struggled offensively, but you saw they didn't give up much to Seattle on the offensive side of the ball, and they had a chance to win that game. So yeah, they've been more competitive. We talked about Hardy being back. Hardy's a great player. People might not like him, and rightfully so, but you're going to see he is a great player. Des Bryant is a great player. And when Des Bryant's on the field, all of a sudden that makes Jason Witten a better player. That makes Terrence Williams a better player. There's a lot of good players on the Dallas Cowboys, and people have to be aware of that.
I agree with you 100%. I think that this team has lost some games that, quite frankly, they shouldn't have lost. If they had better quarterback play, they're probably well ahead in these games and don't need to have these, the kickoff return doesn't beat them. The game last week, they don't get beat in a 13-12 game. They probably have a bigger lead because their defense has played well, and that is what is scary about this game, is that their defense has been good. The Eagles' offense has been a big problem. How about on the other side, though? What do you think about getting Alonzo back and this Eagles defense against Matt Castle?
Well, I think they'll play well, and they played well for most of the season. The inside linebacker thing has been an issue we talked about because all four guys are getting ready to be back, but D'Amico didn't go again today, so it's going to take care of itself, and you're going to have the three-man rotation of Alonzo, Kendricks, and Jordan Hicks. Now, my concern with D'Amico Ryans out of the lineup is he's the true leader of that defense, and especially defending against the run. He's the one guy who's very good against the run. But you counter that with the fact that although Dallas is sixth in the NFL in rushing, it hasn't been nearly as explosive as they were last year with DeMarco Murray, and that's because the backs aren't as good. The offensive line is very good. It's still probably the best run-blocking offensive line in football. You still have three All-Pros. Zach Martin is just tearing it up again. Teron Smith is one of the best 2 or 3 tackles in football. Travis Frederick is one of the best 2 or 3 centers in football. And now you have La'el Collins, who at least if you watch the film, is just killing people. Now, he's a rookie, and he'll make a mistake here and there, but the talent level on that offensive line, now that he's taken over, has only gotten better. So it's a big test, and this is probably a week similar to Carolina because Carolina also was a power rushing team. This is a week you would probably want D'Amico Ryans more than Kiko Alonso, whereas you're playing a passing team, you'd probably want Alonso more than D'Amico Ryans.
Yeah, and it's funny. You look at the situation with the Eagles on the defensive side of the ball. That has been a strength for them, and yet they really haven't been full strength yet. As you mentioned, Ryan's going to be out again, most likely this week, it looks like. Talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Obviously, there are other things going on in the NFL, and I think they're interesting to get to. John covers the league nationally for todayspigskin.com, and I'm sure the Lions situation is something that is the top of the food chain in terms of the national news this week. They decided to get rid of the GM Martin Mayhew out there, which the time has finally come in Detroit that it looks like this thing is going to be a real messy end of the season for them.
Yeah, it's an ugly situation there, and it's a very strange time. It's strange enough when you fire a coach during a bye week, but to fire a general manager just makes no sense whatsoever. What is the new general manager going to be able to do mid-season? And it was a clear indication that they wanted some movement at the trade deadline, but as we talked about on Tuesday, there were no trades. You have to go back to Denver getting Vernon Davis the day before. That was it. It's not like Martin Mayhew is sitting on his hands while everybody else is wheeling and dealing. That's not how the NFL works. And that's not to say he should have kept his job. This is a poor organization, but you make the move at the proper time. And you see what happens in other cities that do things correctly. And this is not when you do it. And it just brings to fruition the fact that now Jim Caldwell, the coach, is basically on borrowed time, because when you do hire a new GM, he's going to want to bring in his new coach. So in essence, you've blown up the whole organization in November. And I realize you're having a bad year, but it's not like the Detroit Lions aren't used to having bad seasons. Once went 0-16 with Rod Marinelli as the head coach. So they've been through it before. So I understand the mentality of we want to make a change, but you have to do it at the right time, and this isn't the right time.
Yeah, disaster, and the Eagles play the Lions coming up on Thanksgiving Day. You wonder if the wheels will really have fallen off that team by that stage of the season. What about the Giants in their game this week? They are taking on Tampa Bay. Tampa's been pesky. They went to Atlanta and won last week. Giants might get JPP back, Prince Amukamara. What's the deal with that game?
Well, Tampa's playing better, as you mentioned, and Jameis Winston, I think he's going to be a star in this league at some point. Now, he's going to have hiccups from week to week. The consistency issues are going to be there, but if he gets hot, and we saw what the Giants aren't exactly the greatest defense in the world, giving up 7 touchdown passes to Drew Brees. So there's going to be an opportunity for him to get hot and gain some confidence. Now, hopefully, Prince Amukamara will be back, and that'll help the Giants tremendously. But we talked about it for a long time. Whenever JPP gets back on the field, I have to see it before I believe it. I don't think he's going to be able to help them at all. They have one of the worst pass rushes in football. I don't think that's changing anytime soon. And even though Tampa Bay is lightly regarded, they have other things you have to deal with. Doug Martin's having a great year. I did my midseason All-Pro team, and I put him on it. I think he's been the best overall running back in football when you add everything in as far as rushing the football, catching it out of the backfield, and picking up the blitz and pass protection. He's been tremendous. So I think the Buccaneers are a little bit better than people think they are, and the Giants are a little bit worse than people think they are.
Let's go to Washington. Any shot for them against New England?
None. None whatsoever. But you can say that against most people when they play New England. Not all, but most. The Redskins, it's been very positive. It's been better than expected. And that's good for Jay Gruden because he basically put his reputation on the line and said, I wanted to go with Kirk Cousins. And at times it's worked. He can throw the football. He's another guy. He's a streaky passer, and he can get it going and look great at times. And he can also throw 3 or 4 interceptions, look like the worst quarterback in football. I think more likely when you're playing Bill Belichick in New England, it's going to be the latter than the former.
We asked the poll question earlier in the show, John. Which major offseason addition for the Eagles will have a better second half for the Eagles? Will it be Bradford or Murray? It starts, I guess, Sunday night. Which guy has a better second half of the year?
Well, depending on, is DeMarco healthy? Is DeMarco Murray healthy? Pat Shurmur says no. Chip Kelly says, I don't know anything about his health or anything wrong with him. But
you surprised by that? You surprised by that?
No, I don't think there's much communication going on in that building at the present moment. But if DeMarco Murray's a better football player, so I would assume that he would have the better second half, and it's already started. Awful start. I think over the last 4 games, DeMarco Murray's averaged 76 yards a game. So it's not great by any stretch of the imagination. Certainly, when you compare it to last season, 145 yards, it looks awful, but he's already started to move in the right direction. I haven't seen that from Sam Bradford, to be perfectly honest, and I think Sam Bradford's further hampered by the fact he doesn't have any receivers. That's a legitimate excuse for Sam Bradford in this season, is the fact that the Eagles receivers just haven't performed well, and it's probably one of the worst 2 or 3 groups in all of professional football.
All right, John will have his pick tomorrow on the show. He'll have it up on the website, 97.3 ESPN.com. And obviously this Cowboys game for Dallas, I think this is a real big one for them, John, as we kind of talked a little bit. If they lose the game on Sunday night, 2-6, that puts a lot of pressure on them to virtually have to run the table and most likely need help once Romo gets back. Drew Pearson was on earlier, John. He said if Romo wasn't on that long-term IR list, that he thinks they would try to play them this week. That's how desperate they are down there.
Yeah, I believe it, and because I know I talked about that with Dez and Brad Sham. We talked about that on Tuesday. I think that showed the desperation and the fact that they probably pushed him back too soon. So I think it is, from Romo's standpoint, I think it's good they put him on the short-term IR list because I believe they would be pushing him back. And as we mentioned, we saw it with Rodgers, we saw it with Foles. That's an injury that needs a certain amount of time to heal, and you really can't come back early from it.
He said he thinks the Cowboys have egg on their face for the Murray decision. And Shereen Williams told us yesterday, too, that team would not be 0-5 if in this streak if DeMarco Murray was still there. So there's a lot of people down there who are looking at this game and thinking about a lot of the what-ifs because of Romo being hurt and how that has changed and altered this division race. But that's what we have on Sunday night. Short-handed Cowboys against the disappointing Eagles. That's your prime-time game for Sunday Night Football. John will have his pick tomorrow at 4:05. Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, Mike.